Welcome to week 5, everyone, and welcome to the absolutely epic early week podcast. We're here in our third week. I'm hanging out with a couple of my good buddies today. Bobby Fi, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It was a good weekend. But can't complain. I was happy I had Julio Jones in most of my lineups. Yeah, things are pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, maybe I could have gotten a shout out, a text from you or something that I was missing out by not having Julio Jones, but yeah, whatever. I still had a good weekend. It would have been better, obviously, with Julio. And our third member, the great Grant Neefer. Grant, I'm going to throw it over to you for our week 5 Grant's rant.
This week isn't much of a rant. It's just I am absolutely amazed by the fact that people are not starting Roethlisberger right now. I get that he's had some huge personal problems in his past, and he's probably a legit terrible person. But this week he was only 40 times more owned than Ryan Fitzpatrick, which is just insane to me. And he's the best play every single week until his ownership goes over 10%. Doesn't matter who he's facing, especially at home. He has to be over 3% owned, and it's just silly. And also, that's it. I don't have any real rants. Nothing bad happened to me this week.
Are you at all concerned that Roethlisberger does not have the same beard game that Ryan Fitzpatrick has?
I wouldn't expect him to have a beard right now because he's essentially a 35-year-old baby. Or at least that's what it looks like.
So
Are you projecting there, JM, just because you're fearing not having your own beard anymore?
No, well, I mean, I know that Grant doesn't love me as much as he once did. For any listeners who have not seen, I shaved off my beard and cut my hair. So I did post a picture on Twitter as proof if you want to check that out. But no, I mean, I'm aware that Grant doesn't love me as much as he once did, but you know,
it looks like you had a baby that aged like Patch Adams for the last 3 years, and that's what you look like now.
I'm pretty certain I will get ID'd because I'm a 31-year-old who might look 19. So that was one benefit of the beard was I definitely looked older than 19 years old. But yeah, so we're gonna jump into this week. We're gonna talk about, as we do every week, 5 trends or traps. We're going to talk about the matchups we love, and then we're going to talk about Money Matters. Stick around to the end of the show. Actually, I guess we might as well talk about this now. If you missed last week or if you only listened to the beginning of the show, shame on you. But at the end, we agreed to each week make a bold prediction, and the loser of the bold prediction has to post an embarrassing tweet on Twitter with no explanation to it. He cannot respond to anything. He cannot like anybody's retweets or tweets back. So Grant lost our bold call. And the tweet we're going with, which Grant has chosen not to veto, this is not necessarily verbatim, but something along the lines of, "My heart is absolutely broken right now. Never trust a woman. Is this hell?" So Grant will be posting that on Twitter tomorrow. Look for that. I guess today when you're listening to it, because this goes up on Tuesday. And Grant cannot respond to any questions about the tweet, etc. So enjoy that and stick around for the end of the show for our bold predictions for next week.
I would like to make it clear that JM came up with that punishment, and only because for anybody I know who's listening, it wasn't me, as much as you might think it was.
Last week, I said that there would be 3 tight ends under 4K who would outscore Coby Fleener. And then you guys said, was it Michael Thomas and Kevin White? Was that your guys?
Yep. And I barely lost it.
Yeah. So did you have Kevin White on that one?
I did have Kevin White.
Yeah, I had Kevin White in my lineups. So
I actually switched and had him in most of my lineups, a lot of my lineups too.
The injury really hurt there, but it's all good. So this week we're going to look at 5 trends or traps. We're going to look at 3 units. That's units, not Unix, for any Unix fans out there. Which, by the way, each team should have a team Unix. I mean, that'd be pretty cool. But we're going to look at 3 team units and 2 individual players. So the first unit we're going to look at is the Carolina Panthers pass defense. So the Panthers shut down Stephon Diggs a couple weeks ago when everyone said, the Panthers pass defense is no good. And then obviously Julio Jones posted 300 yards against them this last week. So trend or trap, Bobby, is the Panthers defense awful or did they have a bad game?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think that I don't think that they're that strong. I think that they had actually a pretty good schedule if you look at a lot of it last year. And I don't know. It's a tough situation because getting torched by Julio, I don't feel like that should be penalized against anyone. But they're questionable to me. I'm not necessarily looking to target them yet. I feel like there's a lot of weaker defenses, a lot of weaker secondaries. But they are somebody who I have no problem taking players against going forward.
All right, Grant, what's your take on the Panthers pass defense?
They're bad. They're not horrible. I mean, people need to realize that Matt Ryan right now is the top quarterback in all football.
Which is insane.
Yeah, it's just silly. How does that even happen?
It's the regular season. It happens.
Yeah, but he's good. A lot of the yards and points that got put up against San Francisco were in garbage time, and Minnesota's putting up 14 points already tonight by halftime, and they're not as bad on offense as people think. Yeah, Carolina's bad, but they're not nearly as bad. You can target against them, and I love the spot this week against Winston, especially with how bad he did last week. But they're not that bad of a defense.
So I've kind of been trying to think through this because I totally missed Julio Jones. I mean, it's incredible that I still had a good weekend without Julio Jones because he did end up around 15% owned in a lot of tournaments, at least higher dollar tournaments. But so I've kind of been thinking through this, especially watching, like the Chiefs by the Steelers last night. These man coverage teams that they're going to shut down like moderately good receivers and they're going to get torched by top receivers because they're not giving help to these corners. Whereas it's, these zone coverage teams like for instance, Cincinnati that can slow down Antonio Brown. And so I think that's kind of interesting to dig into more as we move forward. But yeah, I think that the Panthers, honestly, so people were saying use Julio Jones. Bradbury's going to be shadowing him. Bradbury's a second-round rookie out of Samford, not Stanford, Samford.
Mm-hmm.
But Bradbury got hurt on the third play. Julio did have 3 catches already by that point, and didn't return till the fourth quarter for a few plays. So we really didn't even see key matchup, the Panthers quote key cornerback matchup. I don't think it would have made a big difference, but I do think that top receivers will definitely be able to torch the Panthers. I think Mike Evans is a super interesting play this week. And I think kind of moderate receivers will still be guys that will get shut down by the Panthers. So that's my take there. The next one we're going to talk about is we're going to reach back a couple weeks. Team that was on bye and is coming back, and that is the Eagles offense. So Grant, I'm going to throw it to you first. Eagles offense, are they legit trend or is it a trap?
I don't even know at this point. I personally think that they're a good offense. I like Matthews. I loved him all last year. Aguilar was a drastically underrated guy. Who knows what happened to the Chip Kelly offense? But so far this week, they are putting up incredible numbers. And this season, they're putting up incredible numbers, and I don't understand how, but I don't think you can stay away from them anymore. Everyone's on their offense is pretty underpriced still, and they're going to put up numbers, I think, until we hear otherwise. So I think the more underrated part is their defense, or overrated part was their defense. They're probably not as good as they've looked, but they're better than people are going to give them credit for. And so I do think we're going to see low ownership on them compared to, a team that's been putting up, that's 3-0 and that just put up 36 or whatever they put up against the Steelers. Bobby, what's your take on that?
I think that it's a mix. It's not an offense that I'm looking to target much in general, to be honest, still. I do think that the pricing makes it interesting, like Grant said. It's not. I'm probably not looking to stack the games they play in because I think their defense is pretty solid. I think the one thing that stands out to me is Aguilar, especially like on DraftKings, he's 3,500. He's going to have one or two 30-plus fantasy point games this year, and if you get him at the right time, I'm not kidding. He's got the talent. He's actually he's getting the targets. It's just for a few things to go his way, and he's going to be one of the highest scoring guys. And nobody's on him, and he's 3,500. And I just think he's the guy worth considering most weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely a high risk, high reward play, but like you said, the reward is really high. I'm really interested on, two things. One thing off of what Bobby said is it does make a big difference that defense is not going to get into a lot of shootouts. And so if you believe that defense is legit, you can't expect them to put up huge points most weeks, which does bring us to the running backs. I am really interested to see if we get any clarity on that backfield this week because, that's a good spot to be using running backs, but, throughout the season, just moving forward with the Eagles having such a solid defense. But as long as they're, murky in the backfield as far as who they're using and who has what role, it'll be tough to trust that. But yeah, against Detroit this week, if Wendell Smallwood were going to get 18 carries, he'd be one of the best plays on the board. We just don't know on that. So the third unit is one that probably you won't hear anyone else talk about. And we started recording a little bit earlier than planned, so I didn't get to look up the exact stats on this because I was cleaning the house before my wife gets back in town. But I won't post this on Twitter because I kind of want to keep this quiet for now. I'll talk about it here and talk about it in the NFL Edge this week. But the Saints' pass defense against wide receivers. So a couple weeks or coming into this week, I think they hadn't given up more than like 35 or 40 yards to a wide receiver for a couple consecutive weeks. And then this week they, held Travis Benjamin and Tyrell Williams to disappointing games. And if you watch the Saints, they're playing so far off the wide receivers that they're basically inviting, short passes and preventing big plays to wide receivers. We've seen it before. The Falcons last year had one of the worst pass defenses, but they allowed fewer fantasy points to wide receivers than any other team in football. So this is kind of an interesting one because I'm going with trend on the Saints being better against wide receivers than people think. Of course, people think the Saints are the worst team in history against wide receivers, so it's not difficult for them to be better than most people think. But I'm going to keep seeing this as kind of a not necessarily a fade spot, but a think really deep about spot going forward for as long as people are just all about taking wide receivers against the Saints. So I just brought up these thoughts to my comrades right before the show and to think through the perhaps stupid assertion that the Saints are good against wide receivers. But Bobby, I'm going to throw it to you first. What are your takes on this? What are your thoughts on this? What will you be looking at this week to see if this is something you can exploit?
I think it's a really interesting topic. I hadn't really thought about it much before you mentioned it, but I did notice they were playing way off the receivers this last week. The thing that sort of surprised me, though, is that you'd think that they have these perfect underneath receivers in San Diego to take advantage of that. And it was Inman actually who made some big plays against them, so it's hard to know. Again, at home, I'm going to take receivers against them constantly. I'm going to stack against them, and it's going to take a lot more than a few weeks to prove anything else to me. The Saints just traditionally at home, not to mention they have a high-power offense, which forces the other team to play fast and obviously leads to more DK fantasy goodness. I'm just saying DK because I'm staring at that screen right now. But I mean, it's something on the road where I think that it's something where I would look to target against them, and I've sort of learned my lesson because that's been my biggest punishment so far of the season is stacking against them on the road, and they were really, really good in those games. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So it has affected me that way, but it's something that's still in New Orleans. It's going to be hard to get me off of it.
Grant, what about you? What are your thoughts here?
Well, first of all, I don't think they're playing this week.
They're not playing this week.
Yeah, but I think that what you're saying makes sense, and they're not as bad as people think because they're not the worst team in the league against wide receivers by a fairly decent shot. But I think the thing with how they play defense, it keeps us more towards the mean. They're still giving up, 25.5 points a game to wide receivers so far, and not even full PPR leagues. They're still getting an average of 15 receptions and then some, and 213 yards at the receiving end. It's one of those things where I think it drives them more towards the mean. So you're not going to see them as great of tournament plays. Like, I won't be playing many people in GPPs against the Saints, I think, because they're going to get some receptions. They're not going to get big blow-up plays, but they're going to get yards and they're going to get receptions. So, I mean, that's my thoughts. I could be completely wrong.
No, I mean, it's logical, but what about Tyrell Williams and Kelvin Benjamin, who are the ideal guys to run underneath routes? And especially you try and get Benjamin in the open field, and then you use Williams' size and athleticism. And they did absolutely nothing against this team that's supposed to give up those sure points. To me, those were the safe plays this week. And all of my risky plays worked out, and those were my safe ones that killed me. So maybe I'm a little bit biased. But I'm just wondering, because what happened this last week is sort of a little bit the opposite of what we're talking about. Because the guy who really hurt them was Inman. So maybe you look at the second or third receiver on a team rather than the first receiver.
And here's something. So I'm looking back through the stats. Obviously, the Saints or the Falcons, their highest receiver output was Sanu with 31 yards. And another thing on this could just be what we've talked about with the Chargers, that they're so bad. The Chargers last year, that the Saints are so bad against the run that you're going to see a little bit less in the pass game. So week 3, I was off on the numbers. Obviously, Odell Beckham disappointed, but he still had 86 yards. Victor Cruz had 91, but that was on a couple kind of fluky broken plays. Sterling Shepard was the one who did consistent work against them. 8 for 117 in the slot. Dontrell Inman was, if I'm not mistaken, playing primarily in the slot this last week. So that might be something to look at as well. As far as just where and that would make sense, if a team is filtering targets toward the middle of the field, tight ends are going to do well against them, slot receivers are going to do well against them,
That's right.
Running backs are going to do well against them. So, and we're kind of seeing the same thing with the Bears too, just playing a bend but don't break defense, which, that can lead to no big plays to outside receivers, which really does lower the fantasy upside compared to a team like the Chiefs that are going to play man coverage on Antonio Brown and he can just burn them. So any final thoughts on the Saints before we move on?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to add to what you said about the tight. Sorry, Grant. I just thought about just the tight end thing. You could see that Hunter Henry had 7 targets, and they were mostly plays 15 yards or more that they were targeting. And he only had 4 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown. He had a solid game. I do think that you can really exploit them at the tight end position going forward as long as they want to play backing off, because that seems to be the one thing that the Chargers were able to take advantage of. And I can't remember the week before who they played. Top of my head. Oh, the Giants. Giants scored a touchdown also. I think it was either Janelle or Ty. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so one thing, I'm looking through all the stats right now, and one of the biggest things is not so much the Giants, well, a little bit the Giants. I think running backs are averaging about 5 receptions a game off the Saints. Pretty high considering some of or actually they're averaging 6 or 7. Gordon had 6. We saw what Coleman and Freeman did in the receiving game against them. Vereen and Rashard Jennings had 5 receptions. And I even think that Latavius Murray, or it was actually the second string running back or third string running back. Yeah, he had a reception, but Jalen Richards, that was it. Between every single game, they're getting just tons of catches out of the backfield. And I too much into it, but it's a trend so far. I don't know who we'd take next week against Carolina, but I mean, Fozzie Whitaker, I think, had like 6 or 7 targets this week, so he could be something to look for next week. But it's definitely something where tight ends actually haven't done that great statistically, but I don't think they've gotten any touchdowns or many touchdowns so far. So, Yeah, I mean, stay off wide receivers in GPPs and go towards anyone else on the team, or go for third-string
Yeah,
wide receivers.
obviously, we all need to dig into this a little bit more. I just started working through this thought, an hour before we began recording. I brought it up to you guys 10 minutes before we began recording, but I do think it's something for listeners that it's worth digging into. I'm sure we'll touch on it again next week when the Saints will be playing again, as opposed to just indiscriminately taking players against the Saints. Figuring out where they're weakest and where teams are going to be attacking them is definitely in an edge moving forward. So the next one we want to talk about is one that we talked about last week, and that is the great Julio Jones. So I don't think any of us, disagree that he's one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in football, maybe the number 1, because we saw what happened to Antonio Brown without the connection he has with Ben Roethlisberger. Put him on a different team and he maybe wouldn't have the same impact that you could just move Julio to a different team and have. But the issue in my mind was the targets were so low. He hadn't gone into double digits yet. They were, clearly not forcing him the ball. Then all of a sudden, he goes off for 300 yards and they're giving it to him basically every play. So, Bobby, I'm going to throw it to you first on this one. What's your take on Julio Jones' usage, trend or trap moving forward?
I feel like this speaks exactly to what Grant's point was a minute ago about New Orleans, because that's really the one game that stands out. At Oakland, he had 5 for 5. Yeah, he didn't have a ton of targets, but he had 8 targets the first week against Tampa Bay. He had a touchdown in both those games. So it's really just the New Orleans game that was an outlier. And partly it's based on what they were doubling him the entire time. And the way that they were doing so much damage with both the running backs, with Coleman and can't think of the name off the top of my head for some reason, Freeman. That's how they chose to exploit them, how they chose to exploit New Orleans when they played last week, the week before this week. I think that going forward, Julio Jones is the number 1 receiver as long as everyone's healthy in Pittsburgh. I really do. I think that I have him, I actually think significantly higher, not necessarily every week, but I mean, like not this week at Denver, but in general, going forward, he'll be my number 1 receiver.
Grant, what's your take on Julio Jones and his usage?
You had me all the way up until you said number 1 receiver, because that's Antonio Brown, and it will always be Antonio Brown.
No, I don't. The only reason I'm saying is, like, you see what happens with Antonio Brown's upside, and Sunday was a great example. Their offense is so explosive that if the other team doesn't hang with them, Atlanta's going to be in shootouts. They're going to be, the people are always going to be able to come back against Atlanta. It's very different against Pittsburgh because their defense is a little bit better this year. And if you're going to blow people out and score them 35-0, I mean, Antonio Brown based on his first quarter could have had 80 fantasy points. It's just, he wasn't given the opportunity because the game was just completely over by then.
He was playing against a completely anemic offense. So, I mean, we can argue all the time. I mean, Philly put up 35 points against him. It's one of those things where I still think that Antonio, you look at what he did last year, 1 week, he had 270 points and 3 touchdowns, something like that, and like 14 receptions. Crazy.
He's phenomenal. I said when they're fully healthy. I said that's what I'm saying. And it gets cut into by Le'Veon being back, because Le'Veon is an amazing weapon. He's my favorite guy to use in that team going forward. But but
they don't really have a second wide receiver. I don't like any of their other receiving options besides Le'Veon and Bell.
Roethlisberger's so good. Everybody is so fast, and his ability to create extra time. They're gonna explode all the time. They had 1 bad week against Philly, and it's funny because they still actually put up decent fantasy. Like Antonio Brown still put up 29 fantasy points on DraftKings. But anyway, I'm just saying that's the only reason I would say Julio over him is just based on situations.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. I disagree, but it makes sense. So yeah, going forward, I think. The one thing we were worried about when we talked last week was targets. And if you look at Antonio or Julio Jones' targets last year, there was a while where he was on pace for just an absurd amount of targets. Him and Hopkins were taking the huge line share of the targets for the entire team. And Julio Jones is too much of a complete physical specimen that he can go off anytime, any week against anyone. And he's going to have the targets for the rest of the season. Sanu is injured, I think, still. Played through a dislocated shoulder. The only person they have besides him is checking down to the running backs. And Ryan's putting up huge numbers, so it's got to start going to Jones more, because I don't think the rest of the team is going to have that many yards receiving that Julio Jones won't put up huge numbers.
When Kyle Shanahan went to the Falcons as the offensive coordinator, I was pretty excited because Shanahan generally schemes the ball to his best weapons.
Yep.
And last year we saw that with Julio getting 204 targets. I mean, it's the same thing when Kyle Shanahan had Josh Gordon. He just is going to force the ball to this top target. And last year, Julio had 2 games the entire season with single-digit targets. And then we're coming 3 weeks with single-digit targets. So, for me, I care a lot about targets. And so if I'm paying $9K for a receiver, I rarely roster Odell Beckham because he usually gets 7, 8, 9 targets. And every once in a while gets double digits. Same thing with AJ Green, although less so this year. Whereas Antonio Brown and Julio last year, you knew they're going to get double-digit targets. So
that could change with Eifert back, by the way, in Green's case.
What's that?
That could change with Eifert back in Green's case.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good point.
Sorry.
But yeah, so this is definitely an interesting point for me, because if the Falcons are not going to feed him targets, then he's not a guy I'm going to pay $9K for on DraftKings. But if he's going to get this sort of usage, then obviously he's one of the top plays every week. So one last thing on Julio is we were talking earlier about beating man coverage. So obviously the Broncos have superior cornerbacks to the Panthers. But we saw what Antonio Brown did to the Broncos last year. So any off the top of the head interest in Julio as he'll be lower owned this week and will be facing man coverage, albeit against tremendous cornerbacks. Grant, I'll go to you first on that one.
If he's under 10% owned, I'll play him a lot, and I'll have to do research later on the week to figure out what his ownership percentage is going to be roughly. But yeah, if he's under 10% owned, you play him. I think Matt Ryan's a great play this week, and no one's going to touch him. They keep not touching him every single week. Denver, I think they can put up huge numbers because chances are they're going to be coming from behind. Denver's offense is actually clicking a little bit. So I love the play this week for Julio if his ownership percentage is low enough. If it's over 10%, I think that's just too much to – but I'm guessing it's going to be around 4 or 5.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Bobby, what about you?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I would think Matt Ryan would probably be the worst quarterback to take this week by far. In my personal opinion, I would never touch him, but I do think there's a spot for Julio because of the other points Grant touched on. Playing from behind, I think that's going to be a big thing. And they're going to force feed him the ball just like they did last year. The problem is things get masked by winning. The fact that they've been winning early in the season by doing other things and getting more creative doesn't mean they're not going to, when games really matter and are tough, they're not going to go back to what matters to them. They had a message to send to Carolina. That was a big game for them. That was a really important game for them. Just even psychologically, just in the interdivision and all the history and everything, and going forward. This is a huge spot for them. In those situations, Julio Jones, that's when he gets force-fed the ball. That one game, I think it was his best game before this, where he went off in Green Bay when they actually had a solid pass defense that year. I think he was 2% owned that night or something. He put up 50 some odd points.
What was that? Was that Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football? I remember that game. I had Julio.
I had Julio too, and actually, I had an outside chance. He got hurt in the 4th, and I remember I had an outside chance at winning the millionaire, and I had it because I ended up finishing 18th, I think, with the lineup, and nobody in front of me had him, and I was 7 points behind, 8 points behind. I needed a score from him, and it was garbage time mostly. They were down by 30 in the 4th, but they came back anyway. I feel like this could be that kind of a situation. And there's a lot of history with those two, so I wouldn't go with Ryan, but I do think Julio could see 15 to 18 targets this week, and he's pretty much matchup proof in my opinion. I'm not worried about Talib or anybody else.
All right, so last guy we want to talk about is probably a pretty easy one. So I brought this up last week. I suck at season-long football now because I don't start my research until September because of baseball. And so I'm usually way behind when I draft a season-long team, and I usually lose the first 3 or 4 games and then start winning because I pick up guys like Jordan Howard. So I talked about how I picked up Jordan Howard before Jeremy Langford got hurt because he just looked like a much better running back. And I figured he would get the opportunity soon enough. Obviously, it happened sooner than expected with the injury, but I like Jordan Howard a lot just as a player, not even just as an injury filling, but as a player. But trend or trap, Bobby, is Jordan Howard going to be a legit fantasy play moving forward, or should we be cautious?
I think it's good to be cautious just because of how bad that team is in every way. And I don't know how they pulled off this game last week, but I think the Lions are terrible also. I think Jordan Howard is a guy who could be a much better player than his line, the people around him would lead you to believe. I think his talent is actually there. I think he has the ability to become a very good running back, but there's so many running backs in that same range once they leap your price into that mid-tier range on DraftKings that he sort of is just lost amongst the rest. And so far, it's not like anybody's putting up specifically huge numbers from the running back position. They're all sort of in the same range. If you look at everybody this week, they had different running backs who won every major tournament. He's sort of in that range of that mid-tier guy in this new, platoon situation world. He actually has more opportunity. I just don't trust the team enough to use him probably as much as I would somewhere else.
Yeah, Grant, what's your take on Jordan Howard?
I love the Chicago Bears. I don't know what Bobby's talking about there, but Howard, yeah, we saw what Langford can do, and he can put up points, and he's not that great of a running back. I've said at the beginning of the season that he was actually kind of decent, but that was just because he was putting up decent numbers. Howard is a much better running back, and I think we saw what Forte could do in this system. He can put up good numbers. Howard's a good running back. The only problem I have is going to be week in and week out, what's his ownership percentage going to be? I mean, I get his price has gone up quite a bit, but he was at 20% this last week. If it's gone down against this Colts matchup, it's going to be trend for this week, and I think probably until Langford's out, the next 6 weeks?
Yeah, I think they said 4 to 6, but it's the Bears, so who knows? I mean, he could be out for the season, and they're just not telling us.
Exactly. No, for the Bears, that means 8 to 10.
Yeah, or he could come back in like 2 weeks. But
yeah. Okay, I'll be on the 5th Sunday.
Yeah, so I mean, until Langford gets back, it's for sure a trend, and the only reason you wouldn't start him is if he's going to be too highly owned. But I mean, he's going to be a great play week in and week out, and I mean, I'm much higher on the Bears offense than apparently anyone else on earth, and absolutely love everyone on the entire team. So I might just be a crazy person, but on my main
lineup, I had like basically over $20,000 riding on Zach Miller and Kevin White and Jordan Howard all on the same team. And I nearly used Hoyer on that team too. So of course part of that was just value driven. I mean, they're all so cheap that.
But who got it? It was Eddie Royal.
I mean, yeah, right. I almost put Eddie Royal on too, but they, collectively they hit over 4x value among those three in a 14 to 17 game. Right. And if the game had shot out, then they're going to put up 6x. So like with Howard's price going up,
but it is a good matchup.
As much. I mean, 5,200 is more than I want to pay right now. But if Kadeem Carey is still out, we're going to see 25 touches from Jordan Howard, and I'll pay 5,200 for 25 touches against the Colts for sure.
5,200 is the only reason I'm going to play him this weekend.
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I like that his price went up actually in this specific situation. I want to make it clear that I love the Bears this week. I don't love them in general. I love them this week specifically against Indianapolis, but I totally think they're awful.
They're definitely a bad team as a whole. I think they're a better team with Brian Hoyer at quarterback, but they're definitely a bad team as a whole. But
yeah,
I mean they have a bad defense too, which is going to put them in some shootouts. So.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to Love at First Sight. We're each going to give our favorite matchup, just a few thoughts on our favorite matchup heading into the week. But we're going to obviously throw it to Grant first for his Love at First Sight story and matchup.
So this Love I can't remember her name, but I'm going to call her Red Flag. I met her on a cruise ship, and the first night I met her, she was, as soon as I walk into the club, she's on the floor twerking and looks like a complete mess. Then throughout the course of the night, I continue to seek her out because I'm probably on the same level. And then the red flags start shooting up. I have a baby with a baseball player that I never told him about. I make enough money to support you. Again, 2 hours within meeting her. When are you going to meet me to your, or introduce me to your parents? And then she tried to start a fight with like 3 different girls. So anyway, I went after that night, ended terribly. I went after her again the next night because it's a 4-night cruise, ended terribly. Went after her the next night, ended terribly. And then she came after me the next night and I had to hide the entire time. But in any case, I regret nothing. And she reminds me so much of this beautiful bearded man I know of named Ryan Fitzpatrick. Because about 9 red flags have come up in the last 2 weeks and no one wants to touch him. But people forget that Kansas City's tough to play in. And he threw all those picks this week going against the Seahawks in a game where they were behind. And right now, I think they have the best defense in football. I think they're better than Denver right now. I think they're for sure better than Philly right now. And the numbers almost back that up. It was such a terrible, terrible spot. The only thing that could have gone worse against him was if they were in Seattle instead of New York. But I don't think he's that bad. And he's going to be going up against Pittsburgh, which, again, as long as you're not an inept offense, it's going to be a shootout game against Pittsburgh. And you're going to be coming from behind. You're going to be throwing the ball. And every single person in the offense is going to do much, much better with them throwing the ball a ton, including Matt Forte, who can catch the ball out of the backfield. And a lot of people forget that. I think the end score is going to be about 38 to probably 31 with the Jets losing. But I think Fitz is going to throw for at least 3 touchdowns. And I think Marshall is going to end up with about 10 catches. And one of the things that a lot of people look at is DVP, whatever it's called, I don't even know. But quarterbacks don't get put up that many points against Pittsburgh. But a lot of that is because of turnovers and because of the fact that they're throwing when they're coming from behind. And that sometimes happens, but that doesn't necessarily limit their ceiling. That limits their floor more than anything. So for GPP pick, he's great.
Are you about to get hit by a train?
Oh, sorry about that. There's
Don't stand on the tracks, Bobby.
And I've got my headphones in and everything.
So a couple things from me on that. One, there's when we were coming up with kind of the format for the podcast, I had this idea of Grant giving his love at first sight story, and I sent out the ideas to Grant and Bobby and Dan Bach. Grant responded with a list of like 12 to 15 stories that he had already had written down just in case he needed them for anything. So
No, I wrote those down in 15 minutes.
Okay, well, you already had them all stored up in case you needed them, which is one of my favorite things ever. Also, I had to mute my microphone while you were telling your story so I wouldn't just kill people with my laughing the whole time. And then finally, more pertinent to football. Okay, so we're gonna get to the guy I'm going to talk about here in a second, but people are going to want to pay up at quarterback this week. But there's not a ton of value this week, and you have Ryan Fitzpatrick on DraftKings at 5,100 against Pittsburgh. And the Jets have a good run defense and a bad pass defense, which obviously plays into a high-scoring game against Pittsburgh. It's a super interesting spot. Where as long as he doesn't get benched mid-game, I'm all for it. So, Bobby, any quick thoughts on that game, that matchup, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then your game heading into this week?
Well, as always, I love the story. I actually agreed with everything. I think I even agreed with Grant's prediction of something like that being the final possible score. I think the Jets are better than people think. That's a tough Seahawks D. I think that it's a great spot, especially with the price. I don't necessarily love like thinking too much about quarterbacks because to me, it's not a position that you win your tournaments on. But I love the idea of playing Brandon Marshall and everything. I'm all over Brandon Marshall this week. I like if you want to do a Marshall and Bell pairing or a Marshall and Brown pairing, that's a good correlation. I feel like there's like a lot from that game that there's a lot of fantasy goodness in that game.
By the way, I forgot to mention, I also love Pittsburgh. Play Bell, Brown, Roethlisberger, Jesse James, Fitzpatrick, and Marshall all in the same lineup. If you
Not-
can do
Yeah, I mean,
quarterbacks.
you
Not Jesse
legit
James.
could pick up 200 points just stacking that game. And Grant made an awesome point that, at Kansas City is one of the toughest matchups. The Seahawks are one of the toughest matchups. The Steelers are not. So, I mean, it is really interesting. And to your point, Bobby, I agree on quarterback. Although, if everybody's paying $7,500 at quarterback and you can pay $2,500 less and get the same score, you're not winning your tournament by putting up 40 points from quarterback, but you are gaining a big edge, I think, from having more salary flexibility than others for sure.
No, it's true, but except for that, so far this season, I mean, a lot of the lower price receivers have been consistently better than the higher price receivers on DraftKings, especially, which seems a little slow to react to some of the things that were happening. I actually thought Terrell Pryor's price not jumping until this week was weird. I thought it should have jumped last week, and then this week he didn't do much. But anyway, it's I don't know. There's a lot of value elsewhere, so I feel like I don't mind paying for a sure thing. It's sort of like pitching in baseball for me. Just the way I'm treating modern day NFL. I feel like there are guys to me who have up more upside, but they're also safer than Fitzpatrick, and I'm willing to pay $1,000, $1,500 more for those guys. And also there is other value where I think Paxton Lynch is a legitimate value if he was to play. Although the last thing I just heard was that Simeon's probably going to play, which actually to me makes him interesting value. I think that game is going to be higher scoring than people think, and that's actually another spot I would look. But I do think that I mean there's different ways to look at the value at quarterback, and I think overall though that's a great game to target.
All right, so what do we have for your game this week?
My game is Oakland, San Diego. I know I sort of jumped on San Diego and they sort of let me down a little bit. I've had a little bit of the wrong matches there. The thing that scares me with Rivers, I actually used to like taking Rivers on the zone, and I still do, except for those receivers are just too low priced, especially Williams for me to resist, and Hunter Henry. It's an interesting spot, and I feel like it's going to be a high scoring game. I really don't believe in Oakland secondary at all. I think Oakland's good, and I think they have a good front. But I don't think that they're going to get to Rivers enough. They'll get some sacks, but they're gonna have to throw the ball a lot to keep up with them. I see that to be like a 35-31 kind of a game where I could see San Diego being on either side of it. Those games are always close. So I actually really like that game every which way. I love Rivers. I love Tyrell Williams. I love Hunter Henry. I'm open to Benjamin because I think everybody will be off of him. I think that Cooper's an interesting play because everybody will be off of him. Crabtree's the one everybody's going to gravitate towards, and I understand why. He's the red zone target for sure, but I'm more interested in Cooper just because of the ownership stake. I feel like you can get this game incredibly low owned, and it's got the potential to be the kind of game that goes off that could win you a large GPP.
Grant, any thoughts on that?
There are two teams that when I talk about or research, I have to take a cold shower afterwards. One's the Jets, one's the Chargers. No matter who goes in the Chargers offense, they're great. And right now, no matter who plays Oakland, whether it's a high school team or anyone else, they're going to put up huge numbers. I think right now the Raiders are giving up like 460 yards to opposing offenses per game. Just ridiculous. They are by far at the back end of the league. It's just they're so bad on defense right now. It's ridiculous. This game has got the highest over-under of the week. Williams and Benjamin put up not great points this last week, and Inman's not a good wide receiver, so you should never play him anyways. But Benjamin and Williams did not put up good numbers. They're going to be under-owned when they're going to probably both go off. Rivers is always under-owned as far as I'm concerned. Gordon might be over-owned, but I don't think he's going to have that much to do with it. I love this game, and just like Bobby said, if Crabtree was not so heavily owned as he's going to be this upcoming week, I'd love him. But because of that fact and the fact that Cooper's going to be under-owned, this game's going to be the highest scoring game of the week. This is going to look like Atlanta versus Carolina did this week. It's going to be absolutely ridiculous. So love the call, Bobby.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, and then last game that we're going to talk about before we move on to some of the kind of underpriced players is a pretty obvious one, but as a Patriots fan, I'm obligated to bring up this one, and that is the Patriots coming off of an embarrassing loss, getting back Tom Brady, and playing the Browns. So I don't think game flow is even remotely a concern here, as in I don't think the Patriots would get up 21-0 and then just start running the ball. This is very much a 2007 post-Spygate type situation where the Patriots will happily put up 50 points if they can. They will happily throw the ball with 3 minutes left in the game and a 30-point lead if they can. The Cleveland defense, by advanced metrics, is not as bad as people are making them out to be. They're also not good. The Patriots defense has looked a bit iffy. Cleveland could potentially run the ball with Crowell and slow down the game a bit. But all in all, I like the Patriots offense. And I think that while people will definitely jump on Brady, we might not see as high of ownership on some of the ancillary parts here. Edelman, maybe James White gets involved this week. Maybe Gronk has a huge game. So I think the Patriots is a great spot to target this week. Bobby, any take on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting spot. I feel like my first thought would be I'm a little worried about a blowout and them just handling it. But then you think about it, the Patriots, I feel like they're going to just shove it to – it's a great spot. It's an obvious spot to target. I think it's great for cash for tournaments. The more I think about it, just as I've looked and thought throughout the day, it makes more and more sense than my initial – I'll stay away from a game where they're going to win it easily and who knows if it's going to be blunt or whatever. They're going to try and jam it down their throats. It's a little FU to the league, in my opinion. See, I got my swearing down this week. I love the call.
All right, Grant, what about you?
The more and more I think about this, the less and less I want to play anyone but Edelman. And everyone's so heavy on Brady right now, just in the early talks. I have to wait to see what his ownership's going to look like when Thursday comes around. But I don't think he's that great of a player. One thing I'm worried about is that he is old, and old guys at any given point tend to drop off. So I want to wait a week before I play him in a scenario where he's going to be heavily, heavily owned. So I want to wait on that. But also, people are going to be on Gronk, which they shouldn't be because of his injury, even though he can put up big numbers any week. If he's heavily owned, I want no part of him. Edelman is such an integral part of that offense. It's ridiculous. When Brady was in the offense last year, when Edelman was also in the offense, then they were just great together. He got so many targets. He's a perfect DK play. But other than that, I don't want to touch any of them. I do love Pryor on the other side, and if I'm going to have Brady in something, I'm going to stack him on the other end with Pryor and maybe someone else. I'm not sure. But if I'm going to play anyone from this game, it's going to be Edelman or it's going to be a full game stack.
Bobby, any quick final thoughts before we move on?
No, I didn't agree with the last things that Grant said, that it has to be one or the other. I think Brady on his own is a fine play because he could go to anybody, but I do agree that Edelman's especially a good play. I don't at all want any part of Cleveland in this game. I would consider Pryor if he was still underpriced, but he's not. I just think there's too many other better spots to me. So I wouldn't try and target against them.
My quick takes, and then even though we kind of want to speed past this part at this point, Grant, I'll let you have a rebuttal since we're both going to disagree with you on some things. But a couple things for me. One, I don't think Gronk will be highly owned, though I do agree with you that if he is highly owned, we don't want him because of the injury situation. But I think there's enough concern with Gronk blocking a ton and with him being hurt that he will be lower owned. If that's the case, I would like Gronk this week. I don't like Terrell Pryor only because Belichick notoriously schemes, against the other team's top weapon. And I think that that'll be Pryor. Belichick likes Pryor a lot. He had him in for a workout last year, just didn't sign him because he had a hamstring injury at the time. So I think he has a lot of respect for Pryor and will work really hard to take him out as much as possible.
Nice drop in there. That's good information. I didn't know that.
The last thing was, hey, I'm on top of things, man. The last thing was something to think about is that Brady has not been in the Patriots building for the last 4 weeks. He is not allowed to have any contact with the team, which means that guys like Chris Hogan and Malcolm Mitchell may be less involved this week, whereas guys that Brady has a long-standing chemistry with, Edelman, Gronk, if he's healthy, are definitely the guys that I think you would want to target here because it'll be easy for Brady to step in and get the ball to them right away. And as far as Brady being old, I mean, even old Brady has got to be better than Ryan Tannehill and Kirk Cousins, right? I mean, they did fine against Cleveland's defense. So I'm not too concerned about Brady age-wise. But, Grant, any quick takes on our thoughts to you before we move on?
I mean, this was strictly tournament talk. I'll probably have some in cash. But it's strictly a game theory thing where I think he's going to be too heavily owned by a ridiculous amount. And so that's why I'm going to stay away from him completely, because I would much rather have Roethlisberger. I'd much rather have Luck. I'd much rather have Rodgers. I'd much rather have Newton in any of these cases than Brady if he's going to be way higher owned. So, I mean, I understand
Roethlisberger has the same upside as Brady, probably lower ownership. Who knows? We'll see as the week goes on what the chatter is. But Fitzpatrick stays within 5 or 7 points of Brady for way cheaper, then that's worth it. So, okay, we're going to move on to, and we're going to run through this pretty quickly because I still have to finish cleaning up the house before Abby gets home from being a slob for the last week while she was gone. But we're going to go through Money Matters and we're just look at some of the values we're seeing. So quarterback, we've kind of talked about the guys, but to touch on the quarterback values this week, there's actually a decent amount. We have Ryan Fitzpatrick, 5,100, Paxton Lynch or Trevor Siemian at 5,200. I'm fine skipping over Tyrod Taylor against the Rams, although he is kind of interesting with being able to use his legs. And then Brian Hoyer stands out to me, 5,500 against the Colts. Of course, then we also have Eli Manning. Like each time I've looked at pricing to start the week, he keeps standing out to me as a glaring misprice at $6K against the Packers, although I don't know that I actually want to roster him so much that I just want to say, oh, he's underpriced. But yeah, Bobby, what about you? Anybody at quarterback I'm missing?
Well, I want to echo your Manning sentiment because I felt the exact same way. So at the quarterback position, I thought it could be an interesting play. When I told you before I heard about Siemian, I liked the idea of possibly playing Paxton Lynch. I actually think Siemian makes an interesting play. I think it's kind of a weird spot, but I don't think you need to get too creative on the low end. I think Fitzpatrick is the obvious one. I'm only going to use him probably from the low end. I probably will throw Hoyer into a couple lineups just because I could see that game getting out of hand. But I'm not too crazy about anyone too low end because I feel like there's value at the other positions that we're probably about to discuss.
All right, Grant, take on quarterback.
So I don't know if you know this. This can't be true. Is this true? Oh yeah, it is. Play Siemian, play Lynch, play whoever's playing in that game because they're playing Atlanta, and I believe right now there are the same amount of sacks committed by the Atlanta Falcons as there are on this podcast at 3. So he is going to be a great play this week. He's going to be a great play this week. Atlanta's defense is terrible. But did I do something bad?
Yeah, back to we were talking about the Raiders earlier. So, and I didn't chime in with this, but I found this last week and talked about it in the NFL Edge. The Raiders had going into last week. Now I forget what it was. It might have been 1 sack or it might have been 3. And that's with Khalil Mack, which is just insane. But they're not. And then hurries, they're like way down the rankings in quarterback hurries. David Anderson came into last week rated as Pro Football Focus #1 cornerback. Obviously, we know that Sean Smith is good. He's had a rough start to the year, played better this last week. But I don't think the Raiders secondary is even bad. Just quarterbacks are having so much time against them that if you're not getting pressure on the quarterback, good things are going to happen. And I don't know how the Raiders are not getting pressure on the quarterback, but we're seeing, their back end is just getting torched. And Grant brings up a great point that, the Falcons, they have Desmond Trufant, right? And people sometimes stay away from matchups because of that. But then it's like, well, yeah, but these guys have to cover for 6 seconds each play because they can't get pressure on the quarterback. So good thought there.
Plus, keep in mind
that
rookie quarterbacks, if they have time to throw, they're going to do bad. They need more time to throw than most people who have been in the league for a while. They're not used to the NFL like pace of play. So if Lynch is playing as a rookie, if he has time to throw, then he has the physical talent to shred him. So that's
he'll have time to throw.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Yeah, like these guys, they tend to make mistakes when they're under pressure, and so that definitely makes a difference.
The three quarterbacks are the most reliable statistically in the league. They've you got Wentz, Prescott, and Simeon/Lynch, who have been they're three of the top. What are they? Three of the top 6 highest rated quarterbacks in football right now. 6 if Lynch
yeah, that's
and
insane.
Anyway, sorry about that. Let's move on.
All right, Bobby, I'm going to actually throw this to you first, running back value, because I'm not seeing like anything under 5K to love. What about you?
Nothing to love. And again, I'm always speaking from a GPP point of view mostly. So I do think there's a couple interesting spots below 5K or at 5,200. I do think Howard's an interesting play this week. Like I said, I do like the Bears this week. Is a little higher than what we were talking about. But I think Jerick McKinnon is a very interesting play. Where I think that Houston defense without Watt is a little bit maybe more questionable. I don't think they looked quite as good as they should have last week against a really bad offense. And they did get the defensive touchdown, so my using them as my D made sense. But in general, I think that you could probably exploit them, and they're using McKinnon a ton. I mean, I've watched them a lot of this Monday night game, and he's getting featured a lot. He's going to be catching the ball out of the backfield if the game stays close and is in the mid-20s scoring wise at 4,000. He's a great value because he could easily hit 20 fantasy points on DraftKings. Latavius Murray at 4,200. They won't give him the ball. It's so annoying. Nobody will ever be on him because of his touches. I don't entirely understand it. I even think Washington you could make an argument for. These are long shot GPP plays. But I'm talking about if you want to take a shot on somebody, those are the guys I would look towards. I think there's much better value at wide receiver and tight end. But I think those are 2 long shot plays. Well, Murray a long shot play. I think McKinnon actually makes sense probably in both formats to me. I mean, I think he's going to get featured a lot.
All right, Grant, anything you're seeing at running back that Bobby didn't touch on?
I mean, there's not much. These are 2, we'll just say, complete long shot guys. But Fozzie Whitaker, he got 10 targets this week, which is something I'm interested in because of the fact that DK has a full PPR, and he seems to be one of the main workhorses in there. He could go off, like his usage rate is not going to be that high because they rotate guys around. But especially if Cam doesn't play, that could change things. Then we're going to run the ball more. And then a guy that I did not know existed until today, Josh Ferguson. He had 10 targets this week with Indianapolis. I think there's a decent chance that Chicago may be ahead by quite a bit early on just because I hate Indy. And they're going to be throwing the ball. If they're throwing the ball, there's a good chance that he might be in there and he might rack up some points. And then Carlos Hyde, Arizona's defense isn't quite the same. And Hyde, he can put up big points against any running back, really. I mean, I
didn't know we were including Thursday games. If I knew that, I would say Hyde's the easiest play in the world. He's the easiest play in the world.
I always forget what days of the week are.
I totally agree with you, though. It's a joke that he's 4,800. Doesn't anybody think that's a little bit weird that they won't raise his pricing? And he's like one of the most consistent running backs in the NFL, if not the most.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get a ton of touches each week.
Yeah.
On Jerick McKinnon, real quickly, before we move on to wide receiver, even before Watt went down, I guess Watt doesn't really impact this at all anyway, but the Texans were one of the bottom teams at defending running backs out of the backfield in the pass game. So that's another feather in McKinnon's cap, so to speak.
Yeah, actually, I actually worried about the flip side of that for a minute because I think that happens also because they're sending Watt. They're sending so much pressure all the time. They don't have people guarding that position, and they've tended to let that slide. I mean, because they're so aggressive. But without him, they can't play the same way. I still think he's a great play, but I do think there's a counterpoint to that too, that it could actually go to where they're a little more of a standard defense that you can move the ball on, not just hit big plays on because it's not a sack or nothing because they're not blitzing all the time.
So wide receiver, people who read my stuff know that I'm generally, when I'm looking for a quote GPP play, it's going to be a guy that I'm also comfortable using in cash, in that I'm looking for a guy who I feel has a high floor and a high ceiling and that everyone else is just overlooking. So I will, typically miss out on the, say, Latavius Murray 25-point game with 12 touches or the wide receiver who puts up, 25 points with 4 targets. So my list is obviously going to be different from, say, Bobby's list because he's going to take more risks than I will. Also, of course, I build one lineup each week, so that makes a difference as well. But yeah, so for me, looking at like cheap wide receivers, I'm seeing less to like than you are, Bobby, from what you're saying. But guys who can be relied on for targets this week, Robert Woods, but he doesn't really have a ton of upside, but he has, been seeing 6 or 7 targets. And then we have a bunch of guys in the 4K range who are interesting to me as far as they have safety and upside. And that would be Tajay Sharp against the Dolphins. Sharp has genuinely not looked good lately and not done much, but that's a good bounce back spot for him. Victor Cruz against Green Bay at 4,500. Quincy Enunwa with Eric Decker out. I mean, Enunwa is going to get what? Like, he's gotten target counts so far 6, 11, and 7. And the 11 and 7 was with Decker out. Enunwa is going to get a ton of looks against Pittsburgh, 4,600. And then Tyrell Williams against Oakland. I mean, I'm totally willing to go back there once again. So those are the guys that I like as far as that I think their usage will be there and the upsides there. But Bobby, who are some of the guys that you like just from a pure upside standpoint and, from that other standpoint as well?
Well, I definitely, first of all, agree. I have on my list of guys to mention, I have Enunwa and Tyrell Williams. I think they're both in great spots this week. Kevin White, depending on how bad, whether he's hurt, if he is hurt, I do think that going back to Eddie Royal wouldn't be the dumbest thing in the world just because of the game flow. And I feel like the way this game could be played, especially in Indy, I still am not a believer in Indy's defense. I'm not a believer in Chicago except for this week because I really don't believe in any part of Indy's defense, especially at home on turf where they tend to be a little slower than they should. Anyway, I think that there's the guys who are a little bit higher. These aren't huge values, but like I think Sterling Shepard's in a great spot. I think Victor Cruz, who's cheap, who's 4,500, is also in a really interesting spot. They're going to be playing catch up against Green Bay. It could be anybody. That's an awesome receiving core. And for winning GPPs, taking a shot on a guy who's to me, who's 4,500. Yes, maybe they don't have the floor that you're hoping for. But actually, if you look at it, they've all been fairly consistent so far. I mean, the defense they're facing tonight shouldn't have any way on that. This is an extremely good defense, like a top 3 defense in the NFL. And Green Bay is probably more middle of the road. So I liked either Shepard or Cruz as a possibility. And the guy who stood out to me the most was Nelson Aguilar. I think that Aguilar is on the verge of a huge breakout. As I mentioned earlier, you guys, I think that he's going to have a few massive games this year. They aren't just feeding the ball to Jordan Matthews. And it's not like Aguilar's had a ton of targets. He had 5 and 7 the first 2 weeks. It was different against Pittsburgh because the style of the game. I mean, they were up by 20 points right away or pretty quickly. So they weren't throwing the ball nearly as much. And, well, it was a very weird game anyway. I think that game should be just a total outlier. But the fact that he's 3,500, he's a guy you're going to see put up 20 to 30 fantasy DraftKings points very soon. And I want to get him while he's cheap. So he'll be especially against that awful Detroit defense. And I do think they are awful.
Grant, anything at wide receiver that we overlooked?
$3,000 Humphreys. He only had 3 targets this week because they were going up against Denver, and Winston looked like a child playing against them. He's had 10 targets the week before. He's a good player, and he's bare bones priced. I still don't think Vincent Jackson's very good. So play him. He's a great minimum price guy. Andre Johnson at 3,200 against Miami, who's not great. He's still getting a decent amount of targets, and he can put up some points. Mm-hmm. Bryce Butler with
those are both good points. And Adam Humphries,
I agree with that.
Adam Humphries had to take on Chris Harris in the slot, who might be the best cornerback in football. So that's the Monday night game this week, right? And Humphries should get looks again. So
sorry, 2 more. Bryce Butler with Dez out, play him. Or you can play Beasley, either one. And then this is Thursday night, but play John Brown. He's got like 30 targets in the last game.
If you're playing Thursday night, you don't play John Brown. You just don't understand anything. He's the easiest play in the world. Totally agree with that. Sorry.
All right. So, Grant, I threw it over to Bobby first for the last couple, so I'm going to throw it over to you first for tight end. I mean, tight end, there's so much value every week. It's just ridiculous right now, especially with minimum price being $2,500 at tight end. But who are some of the guys who are standing out to you at the tight end position?
Cameron Brate had 9 targets this week. I get it was against Denver, but he's been having targets week in and week out. He's only 2,900. ASJ is gone now because he doesn't know how to not put his keys in a bowl.
Bray is the clear tight end pass catcher. He's going to have a great game this week. He's going to get tons of targets. He's going to end up with 15 points. Tammy, every single week. Denver's not that great against tight ends. And so he could see a decent amount of action with everyone taking care of everyone else. Hunter Henry, every single week. Antonio Gates is out play him. Kyle Rudolph, I've only saw half of what he did tonight because I only watched the first half. And he's great. Witten is one of my guys that no one's really going to have because he hasn't done too much lately. But I think he is second from the lead in red zone targets this season, and I don't know if he even has a touchdown yet. And so that's going to change. And Dak's a rookie quarterback.
He has like 7 or 8 red zone targets and no touchdowns. So
9.
Positive regression, obviously. It was the same thing this week coming into the week with Kelsey, was up near the top of football in red zone targets and finally got his touchdown this last week. So, Bobby, tight end position?
I'll do a quick. Hunter Henry, I love. Great GPP long shot play. Zach Ertz, Gary Barnidge, both will be extremely low owned. Ertz, it's sort of depending on the situation because they've had some success so far without him. So I actually think that it makes him a better sleeper play. He's pretty reliable, and he's actually, I think, one of the better tight ends in football. And for him to be priced where he is, it's probably a little bit off. I think that taking a look at Eifert being back is interesting just because I think people will be off of him, and he's also one of the better tight ends in football. He's only 4,200. Dennis Pitta. I just think Dennis Pitta is in a good spot. Baltimore's still going to use him to move the ball. This last week it was a letdown, but I think it was more of an outlier. I don't think it's going to be the norm. They're actually all, pretty much I could name everybody, and they're all in fairly good spots. The safest play would be Delaney Walker probably because they're going to find a way to move the ball somehow against Miami because everybody does. But I think Delaney Walker is the one sure thing that I would go for. But I think there's a lot of value you could find elsewhere that any would be good GPP plays. And, hey, if your guy gets in the end zone that second time, you're the winner, and all of a sudden you're much smarter than everyone else because they all took Zach Miller when you took Zach Ertz.
All right, so we're going to close off with our bold calls. I've had to kind of figure out mine during the show, but I think I'm going to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I'm going to say that if you take the 9 highest priced quarterbacks and then throw Ryan Fitzpatrick in there with them to make a group of 10 quarterbacks, Fitzpatrick will be one of the top 4 highest scoring in that group. So as far, basically he'll be only 3 guys in that top 9 will outscore him this week.
Wow, that's a good one. I think you stole Grant's.
All right. Grant, did you have Fitzpatrick for your bold call?
No, I was actually, since I disagree with you guys so much, Brady won't finish inside the top 8 quarterbacks this week. Is that bold?
You're going to have another tweet on your. You're going to have another tweet on your account next week.
Yeah. That's, you just lost it again. Now I have to make mine safer. I have to safe in my bold play just because it's such an obvious one. I don't need to have to find an obvious one now. No, I'm just kidding. My bold call of the week is that Nelson Aguilar will be a top 15 receiver this week.
Nice. I like it. I'm gonna say that I probably have just as good of a chance as anybody of losing because Fitzpatrick could throw another 3 picks and just be way out of quarterback contention. But we'll figure out how this all played out. So we hit the hour and 10-minute mark again. Apparently that's our sweet spot. We're trying to keep it under an hour, but we'll see how we do next week. Grant, any quick final thoughts?
If you have heartburn, eat a lot of Mentos. They're delicious, and at least you can calm your sadness with Mentos.
Bobby, any final thoughts?
When life isn't going so well, at least there's daily fantasy sports.
Oh, that got sad.
Hey, it was the it's not like my final thoughts like in ever. It's just my final thoughts of the show. I forgot.
On that note, I'm gonna finish cleaning up the house before I go pick up my wife. And Bobby, Grant, thanks for hanging out. Listeners, thanks for hanging out. We will see you next week, same time, same place, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards this weekend.